We're going to be over here with members of the NeuroCentric Approach Online Academy. That is our NeuroCentric Approach Online Academy is our in-person, or excuse me, online continuing education courses using the NeuroCentric Approach. 35 hours available to you too over here, if you're not a member already, by using the link that is available to you here. It's also a link there on Facebook for the upcoming live events that we will be hosting. The next one is going to be April 20th and 21st in Portland. That's going to be the upper quarter 12-hour course at Evolution Healthcare and Fitness with our member, Dr. Brad Farah, hosting us there at Evolution. And now over to those of you on the Zoom link. Thanks for joining today. Appreciate all you guys spending your time on the your busy weekend, hanging out and geeking out with me a little bit. We got a couple of guests here this morning that will be weighing in at some point. Dr. Glenn Harris is here, and Glenn will be hosting me and Stuart McGill and Mark Irwin and Kathy Dooley and others for the DISC Disc Dynasty, he's calling it, tomorrow. That's online, and it's not too late for you to get a ticket and get on there. So Glenn, why don't you come on and tell people what you got going on tomorrow?
Yeah, so the name came from the original paper by Mixter and Barr there from the 34 New England Journal of Medicine publication, the Disc Dynasty. So I kind of borrowed that with regards to the advertising for the course. I did put the link in for your NCA members in the hyperlink. For those that are online, the password for that is Blazers with a capital B. So in honor of Philip's team out there on the west side. Yeah, so we have our course all set up. It starts at 9:30 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. That's for our friends on the West Coast, so they don't have to get up too early. It's actually going to be rebroadcast with permission from the presenters next Friday for those that can't make it, but you do actually have to register for tomorrow's course. We have Dr. Kathy Dooley giving us a little summary of the anatomy of the IVF and the disc, particularly attention to what structures refer down into the leg, some of the stuff that we've talked about over here in the last 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to have a good review of the radiology and the DI component by Dr. Varsha Kumar, DACBAR here in Toronto. Then we're going to have Stu's going to come and present some discussion on the mechanics and resiliency of the disc. And then that'll take us into lunchtime. In the afternoon, we're going to have Dr. Cox and Philip's going to present lots of stuff on assessment and symptom modification. And then Dr. Irwin's going to present his research and thoughts on the degenerative disc process. And then finally, we're going to have Cesar Incapi from Switzerland, chiropractor PhD, who's going to talk to us a bit about a manual therapy perspective and the risks and benefits associated with that. And then Mark's going to also chime in on that. And we're going to have a little discussion on risk-benefit analysis and how you make that decision process with regards to managing those patients with discogenic back pain with or without radiculopathy. Thanks, Phil.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. I really appreciate you putting all of this together. I think it's a great idea to do this online these days and kind of leverage the technology in a way that more of us can take part in. And I am absolutely honored to be included in that lovely group of hyper intelligent people that I don't necessarily believe I belong in, but thank you anyway for bringing me in there.
Philip, you're too humble, sorry.
Yeah, whatever. But let's talk a little bit. I see Chris Amato is on here today as well. Chris, it's nice to see you here, my friend.
I don't mind me. I'm eating pizza.
So,
It's
yeah,
lunchtime on the East Coast.
yes, it is. You're back in
Not,
Pennsylvania, right, Chris?
yeah, not my best look here, but
Oh
hello.
no, that's all good. We are all about informal here, brother. Are you still taking part
Excellent.
in the rehab group?
I'm the secretary of the rehab board. Yes.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm glad to see that you're here. And have you been culling through any of the online courses that we've got here?
No, I haven't. This is my first exposure other than to what I used to watch years ago.
Cool.
So I'm back in it.
We'll try to keep our pants on then today and
Excellent.
behave respectably. All right.
Excellent.
And thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
As far as topics of discussion today, it was for me a little bit of a light week. So I don't have a killer case study. I've got some that are kind of tangential to my own personal patient care. One of our members here has got in touch with me a while back about some issues that they were having with some carpal tunnel syndrome that just would not change. And that conversation actually prompted him to come on board here on the NeuroCentric Approach Online Academy. Chris, for those of you, you and others that haven't taken part in that, if you go to neurocentricapproach.com, you can find links to the online academy. The online academy is it is essentially a learning, what do you call it? The name escapes me for the moment. It's a thinkific platform, a learning center that houses all of the online coursework that I've got for NeuroCentric Approach. Currently, about 35 hours of online continuing education. It is PACE accredited, and that is available for either a monthly fee or a single fee. Every now and then, for special occasions per year, I'll open it up for rather than a single annual payment, you can pay one lifetime payment and get access to the site for good after that point. Other bennies that you get for being a member of the online academy is the in-person courses that I teach. You get $100 off of those for all of the lifetime members. So try to give you some reasonable value there in terms of your continuing education dollar, and also to get access for events like this that we do on a regular basis, which typically, unless I'm teaching on a weekend, we'll be meeting like this at 9 o'clock Pacific on Saturday mornings and talking shop, geeking out a little bit in an informal way, having a cup of coffee. And I'll usually lead off with a case conference, and all you shy people on here can feel free to also bring your own questions and stuff. I was hoping when I originally started this that you guys would be a bit more participatory in that regard. If whether you've got successes or failures or challenges or troubleshooting, the idea here is to take this theoretical approach, the neurocentric approach, and to sort of pressure test it with more people and see where it's weak and improve it, and see where it's strong and reinforce it. And I'd appreciate you guys helping me out with some of that. Let's see. So the member that got in touch with me about his carpal tunnel syndrome, he was asking if I had any ideas, and I literally texted him a solution. So that's kind of the nice thing about having a conceptualization process that's relatively transparent and not overly complicated. That's part of what I've tried to do with this process. I asked him what he had done for it, and knowing that he was an adept manual therapist, is taught that prior to being a chiropractor. I knew that he probably had leveraged quite a bit of manual therapy at the tunnel, the carpal tunnel, and indeed he had. But using the neurocentric approach, as those of you that are on here and quite aware of at present, but for those of you that are a little new, we try to organize our search strategy by prioritizing first what neurology is present. In this particular case, our neurology present at the carpal tunnel is, of course, the median nerve, but then tracking back upstream in the course of that neurology and testing at different mechanical interface points how that neurology might be functioning at each one of those mechanical interface points. So in this particular case, with our carpal tunnel issue, typically, if I had that patient in clinic, we would first need an index test. And our index test is the movement or activity that that person can do, or it could be potentially a provocative test that you could perform, an orthopedic or neurological test that you could perform in clinic. But you want something ideally that gives you feedback relatively quickly. The bane of this program are those patients that come in and say, yeah, my symptoms only come on when, for instance, I run 10 miles, or my symptoms only come on when I sit for more than 20 minutes. Or, in my case, in one of my offices in a powerlifting facility, my symptoms only come on when I'm squatting more than 400 pounds. And, we can, of course, go out. I've got the luxury of being able to do that, but then having to move back and forth between the gym and the treatment room is sometimes a little bit unwieldy, but I certainly do it. But in this particular case, if I had that patient in clinic, I would have them do the movement. In this case, he was able to, as I recall, move his hand in a specific way to cause a tension along that median nerve tract, and he could reproduce his symptoms. So I had him, if I had that patient in clinic, let's say that their movement was something that looked like this, stretching that median track there, I would stand behind or sit behind them in clinic, and I would provide an upward cervical traction there on the cervical spine and see if their symptoms with their index movement were reduced. Now, I'll give you an example of that in a moment with a power lifter I did see, have been working with in the last couple of weeks. In this case, this particular individual, oh, hush, Siri. In this case, I just texted him and said, okay, do 20 cervical retractions and then repeat your index test. So he goes through his McKenzie protocols and he does his MDT retractions, and then he repeats and he's like, huh, that was better. So then what's my next question? All right, I'll put it out to you guys. When you get symptom modification with your input, what's your next question? Zoom members, Online Academy members, what's your next question? Shout it out or put it in chat. The question is, what percentage of improvement? Okay, what we're looking to do here is to stack cumulative benefits, okay? Because this is kind of like going back to our old double crush idea from back in the day, right? So we can have an impact at the cervical spine with a nerve root that is possibly challenged for a little bit of real estate in that IVF. And that's going to cause a mechanical sensitization of that neurology all the way downstream, such that any place that neurology downstream comes into a mechanical challenge, going around a joint, going through a hiatus in a myofascial compartment, etc., then that is very possibly going to be a point at which you're going to have some complaint, some sensory complaint from that nerve in that particular area. So in this particular case, to my question of what percentage improvement, he got about 30%. Now, in my world, for whatever reason, I've chosen 30% to be significant. There is absolutely no evidence to why I'm doing that. It's just something clinically that I've noticed over the years, because it seems like anything under 30%, and I think my patient is trying to impress me or trying to please me. And you guys are familiar with some of that research to suggest that your patients, they have an investment when they come into your clinic, both time-wise and monetarily, to get benefit from being there. Blessedly, it's rare that we wind up with a patient that comes in that's incredibly cynical and they're looking to prove you wrong. They're looking to prove themselves right for making the choice to spend money and time in your clinic, and they're quite hopeful typically. So in this case, he got 30% improvement. So I text him back, cool, let's remember that. And then he goes downstream along the course of the median nerve, and I just had him palpate some of the hot spots. So we do a doorbell sign. Yeah, he gets a doorbell sign. We go in the brachial compartment where you can kind of easily roll over the distal portions of the brachial plexus, and right in that area get some contact with the ulnar, the downstream ulnar nerve and the median nerve. And he found some tenderness in that area, a little bit, but not a huge amount. But then he got down on the pronator teres, and he found a hot spot on the pronator teres. So I had him do some transverse nerve mobilization, which we define as trying to palpate the course of the nerve, roll over the nerve with your finger to try to elicit symptoms, and then try to get next to, here's the nerve in my example, next to the nerve and bend it laterally, and then hook it and try to bend it the other way. Okay, so you're trying to transversely affect the course of the neurology with your manual therapy input. And he did that on the pronator teres, getting in there, getting on that, and then doing neural mobilizations while he maintains that contact. Then getting on the other side of the nerve and hooking it and pulling it and doing the same thing. So we're trying to give that nerve a little bit of wiggle room at that mechanical interface point. And then what do? We go back and use our clinical audit process and retest our index test. That was a bit better too. So above baseline, what are your symptom improvements at this particular point? And he was up to 50% now of improvement with his index test at baseline. We then did an opener at the carpal tunnel by just grabbing the radius and the ulna and gathering it and pulling to try to create some space there. You guys are probably familiar with this kind of opening procedure, and then working again on simultaneously opening and moving that. So we got an opener, and then we can get in and do the same transverse nerve mobilization at that point as well. And then he repeats his index test, and now he's 70% improved on his index test over just a few minutes. And mind you, I coached him through this with text messaging. Okay, now that's beneficial or helpful that he's a trained clinician and a very good one. And I know, he's got a very deep repertoire of both manual and rehab therapy training behind him. So, but it does give you a little bit of an indication that this skill set and what we're playing with here, this is easy to talk to patients about. It's easy to talk them through, and it's easy to perform in your clinical environment. A lot of what I really try to do with this is to, yes, I will show you other manual inputs that I've learned over the years and that I've developed over the years that I find to be very helpful. But you can also take the inputs, the manual therapy training that you have, and you can put it right on this. You can take the rehab training that you have and you can lay it right down over this. Indeed, actually, I would suggest conceptually you put it under it. The NCA process rides over the top of technique. This is a principles-based system. What I'm trying to get people to do is to first, when a patient presents with pain or symptom in any given area, let's say the shoulder, I want you to first consider neurology in that area. Consider the anatomical relationship of that neurology in that area to other structures, and consider how, with the patient's complaint, especially if they have a typical index movement or activity, how that neurology might be mechanically challenged in that particular area. And then work back upstream at the level of the brain to address what belief systems, prior diagnoses they've had. Let's say that shoulder complaint, they wonder if they're going to need some kind of surgical intervention to open up that subacromial space to try to, give a little more room or something there, even though we now know that those impingement syndromes probably don't occur in the way that many of us were taught. But at any rate, the idea there is to first look or conceptualize in that area what nerves might be involved, and then try to think of a narrative that explains why based on the patient's history. So since we're playing with that idea in the shoulder, let me give you a quick idea, quick follow-up on our patient from last week. I talked a bit about a master's level world record holding power lifter that I've got, that is one of my sponsored athletes. She's given me complete license to talk about her case in these kinds of situations. And last week, I showed you a quick way that we tested that. I can go back, if you guys want to give me a thumbs up, if you want, I can go back and pull that video up and show it. But in her case, her symptom provocation was on bench press, and it was at a very specific point in the bench press. So the location of her pain was anterior and superior on the right shoulder. And the moment her symptom provocation occurred was at depth, just before full depth on her bench press. And it remained all the way to full depth, and the motion arc of pain persisted on both the eccentric and the concentric portion of the bench. And in her case, what I did was stand behind her. We modeled first to be able to demonstrate it for an environment like this, her seated at a seated chest press machine. And with only 50 pounds on it, mind you, she's going to be looking at the world record in her age and weight class for bench press, if memory serves, I think is 193. So she was getting symptoms at anything over 135, but in our model of a seated chest press, she only needed 50 pounds on there unilaterally to cause the symptoms. When I stood behind her and created cervical traction, her pain immediately went away, 100% gone. And the cool part is, with some traction there and maintaining that traction for 3 or 4 reps, I could then step away and she would get an additional 3 to 5 to 6 reps of painless chest press on the seated chest press machine. So that gives you a little bit of an idea too about the physiological process that we think is going on here. When we have a nerve that is mechanically sensitive, the most common reason that that's going to occur is reduced blood flow to that particular neural element. If it's a nerve, if it's an axon, if it is a nerve root, if we compress or tension the nerve for a long enough period of time, then the blood flow to that nerve and from that nerve, because actually it's a perfusion question and venous return is the first thing that we see that's disrupted. But that vasa nervorum, the blood flow to the nerve itself, is diminished under compressive and tension etiologies beyond a certain point in both of those cases. When that degree of compression or tension is long enough, then the nerve will start to, we'll say, complain. The nature of the complaint has been somewhat described by Nobel Prize winner Artem Patapoutian, who a couple of years ago was the co-winner of the Nobel Prize in Physiology for his discovery of the piezo-1 and piezo-2 receptors on a nerve. And apparently that is the switch that occurs that makes that nerve more mechanically sensitive. So in her case, we lifted, we got benefit. Okay, and then I was able to move her over to a position laying on her back on under a bench press. And I think we used 135 on her in that position. She had symptoms again. So I took a mulligan strap and stood behind her and provided traction. And once again, her symptoms went completely away. So all we need to do is have cervical traction done on her while she is in a competition in 6 weeks, so that she can perform bench press and try to set a new world record. All right. So most of you are already thinking about the mechanism of what that compression is at the cervical spine, and you're thinking about your various inputs. So let's consider our IVF inputs. Our most common ones that I'm going to lean towards are MDT first, regardless of why we think it's working. And then second, and the only reason I go to that one first is because patient compliance is very good. It's easy to teach them to do it, and it's easy to get them to do it regularly throughout the day. So I had her do 20 reps of retractions and 10 reps of retractions with extension and rotation. And we repeated our index test, and no joy. She didn't get any benefit at all. So I went and did a proper opener on her, laying her out supine, flexing away, and providing cervical flexion and contralateral lateral flexion, and left her there for 30 seconds, got up and repeated our index. A little bit of change, but it was like in the 30% range, nothing huge. Then I went downstream and I worked transverse nerve mobilization over the suprascapular nerve in that space right here between the clavicle and the upper trapezius. Deep to that is the supraspinatus. Overlying the supraspinatus there is the suprascapular nerve. Distal to that, in that same compartment at the suprascapular notch, the suprascapular nerve takes a right angle turn on the other side of the suprascapular notch to give motor innervation to the infraspinatus, provides motor innervation to the supraspinatus as well, and sensory innervation to the posterior third of the glenohumeral joint capsule there as well. And it was certainly hot, it was certainly painful, and it certainly did not work when I did transverse nerve mobilization on it. We went back and retested her benefit with the clinical audit process, and I got no change in her pressing. Okay. So I prioritize my work to try to have something that she can do, not that I have to do, that she can do between treatments. So I'm trying to give her something that she can do. And I'm thinking, well, we've already established that traction works. MDT and static opener processes aren't doing it for her. So let's show her some traction process that she can do. And let's try to lean towards doing it in a gym environment. So we go over and get some jump stretch bands, the big wide honkers that are there. And we hang it over a chin bar, or over, in our case, the monoliths, since you guys don't have monoliths in your clinic. But we could do that. And then I had her to arrange it and behind her occiput, anchor it with her hands, and then just drop down until she could provide some cervical traction. She did that with some slight pulses up and down to get some cyclical kind of joint mobilization there and distraction, and went back and tested, and she got benefit out of that. So that was her homework. I went into the clinic. I provided cervical traction. I provided an opening manipulation at the C5-6, C6-7 segments. And we got a little bit of benefit, but later on when we trialed it, it didn't stick. So this week when she came back, she had noted that, or we had talked through functional causes of the pain in the shoulder, specifically on position. And I'm not going to go in with an athlete that is a current world record holder that is 6 weeks out from her training, whose coach is 2 doors down from mine. And I'm not going to go in and override his coaching or her bench setup with my pinhead and narrow behind kind of inputs here. But I did consider and chat with him about her setup, which to my eye is way too much out here rather than here. And my DNS training is going to bring me into a spiral kind of movement with a push-up. Now, of course, the position that you're holding the bar with is not going to be one that is conducive for you to get a lot of rotation with your hand and arms, but you can get it with your shoulders by doing a bit of this movement to essentially orient the shoulders from a DNS perspective into the core for an attachment there. Now think about that from a DNS perspective. DNS is going to coach us that if we are off position in your thoracopelvic canister, as Evan Osar would call it, if you are in an open scissors position and your diaphragm is riding up in a position that looks like this, then the core will not be a good fixed point for the shoulder to attach to, and that will cause a reroute of the body to look for stabilization of the shoulder by plugging it into the neck. Okay, so that shrug changes the size of the subacromial space. A competition bench press setup puts the athlete in a position where they aggressively try to extend the entire spine. And what we're typically working on are cues to try to get them to improve their thoracic extension versus their lumbar extension, so that in that algebra of total spine extension, we would be asking for more out of the thoracic spine than what they are commonly able to give us, because modern living tends to take that thoracic spine extension capability away from us. And more specifically in this population, in powerlifting, unless they're doing a lot of ancillary work to improve spinal extension in the thoracic spine and to improve their shoulder mobility, if they're just working shoulders in this plane and this plane, then they will commonly have some reduced glenohumeral joint mobility. So in her case, we talked about trying to improve that position, and lo and behold, what she was able to do in her home training a couple of days a week was she got her husband to give her a lift off, which she gets in competition, but many athletes in training don't have that. So when she got a lift off, she had no load from here, and then she's able to drop the bar down, and she should, after talking with her trainer, there's a sweet spot right in here of bar path. And she had historically, he'd had a difficult time with her being too high. And when she's too high, the shoulders come up. So my cue to her kinesthetically on the bench was I went in right into that front quadrant over here on the oblique and really cued her hard in there and said, give me as much pressure there as you can. And that's kind of like Stu's cue, or what he learned with strongman competitors on the Atlas stone, how they can be in a flex spine position, but use intra-abdominal bracing to stabilize the spine in that difficult position for the spine to maintain stability in. And when she did that and we got a lift off, she had no pain. And in her bench session, she leveraged that lift off and was able to perform a double at 170. So she felt good about that. So she pushed it up and got a single at 180. And that puts her 13 pounds away from a new world record. And we've got 5 weeks to do it. So I'll keep you guys aware of what's going on that. Questions, concerns before we move on to nuclear migration and IVF opening? What are those things about? How do we fit it into clinical reasoning? And I'll bring on one of our esteemed colleagues here, Jerome Fryer from Dynamic Disc Designs. Any questions, concerns? I see nothing over here.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
What you got, RJ?
Just with the bench setup, I've noticed a lot of the times when I work with an athlete that's actually having trouble with the bench setup, or even like overextension in the squat or a snatch position, that I'll try to advise, especially their coach, to like train within like a more neutral, like more braced pattern. Have you seen any success with the coaches at Kabuki and like having them change the setup for training and then transferring it back to a competition style lift? Or do you kind of steer away from even changing that at all?
Excellent question, RJ. The indirect answer to it, yes, they both do it and they coach it. And also in this case, I tested it. To try to get her in that neutral setup, I put feet on the bench and coached her into a stacked thoracopelvic canister and the braced greater intra-abdominal bracing. And we retested her index with 135 on the bar and got no joy. It wasn't until we were able to take her out of her problem position of being too high up with liftoff to get her to start the actual descent of the bar at a lower point. And since she's going to have liftoff in competition, we're all good with that. And we'll let that work in that particular way. Okay. Hello, doggy. My doggy thinks it's time to go to the park right now. All right, nuclear migration. Hoo boy, let's get into that one a little bit. This came up in the past couple of days because one of our members on the community came on and he said, "Hey, Doc, in your clinical companion to Fix Your Own Back, which is an 8-hour online presentation now, which is included in your membership on the NCA Online Academy." He said, "I noticed that when you were going over lateral presentations, you were coaching that you typically would investigate first, placing the affected leg, if there's a sciatica or radicular component, closest to the wall, and you're suggesting that both in that and with a hip shift to that side, that on a prone press up, that will be your initial go-to." And this very thoughtful and aware clinician said that's different than what I was taught in MDT, in my MDT training. And that is indeed the different, and I've known that for some time. And it brings up two sort of competing, well, air quote around competing here, because I'm not about polarization here and getting different people in different systems and such angry at each other. But I think in this particular case, those two competing systems are the two that I mentioned earlier that I like to try to leverage at the IVF. One of those is the MDT idea, which in its earlier iterations was working around a nuclear migration hypothesis. So to explain, say, a bulging disc, which you can go back to the early 80s, and Michael Adams and Hutton's work suggested to us that the injury mechanism for lumbar disc is typically going to be a combination of compression with additional flexion and or rotation. And that when we have that compression and flexion and or rotation enough times or under enough load, then we can start to have a bulging disc phenomena as the inner layers of the annulus fibrosus are compromised. And then in that particular situation, if we have the patient to bend backwards and do extensions per MDT, then we would observe nuclear migration away from that nerve root, which in our parlance and the way I like to refer to it in NCA, that would be reducing threat to those neurological structures. That was all fine and dandy and was sort of the party line for MDT for a number of years, until several papers came out that showed that maybe that nuclear migration doesn't occur in the same way. And these were relatively small studies, but done under MRI and seated MRI, which usually uses a 1 Tesla coil as opposed to a 3 Tesla coil. So you do get less fidelity in the observed pictures that you're seeing, but nonetheless, they did not show nuclear migration in those particular individuals. And back and forth in the literature for a number of years, we've seen that nuclear migration kind of idea has waxed and waned. Can you guys see my screen here? So screen sharing here, I had some conversations with some of the instructors in the MDT program, and they pointed me to this particular paper, which, because I was not able to find as many references as I was hoping in that. on PubMed and such. And this particular paper, the dynamic disc model, a systematic review of the literature from Maury Kober and William Haney, was published in 2013. I still am not able to find this on PubMed, so I'm not sure exactly what the issue was here. But the paper is just a systematic review, and I think, how many papers did they include? I think it was 13. Nope, 12 articles they had total. And they found that the available research supports the dynamic disc model of nucleus pulposus migration. But note that an inconsistent pattern of migration may exist in patients with symptomatic and or degenerative intervertebral discs. So I think that is important because even in my neural dynamics courses that I took, this idea of nuclear migration was called into question. And another paper was also cited that has also come up recently. Let me see if I can pull this over for you to be able to see a little bit better. This paper is from Spine 2001. And this was an MRI study of cadavers showing morphologic changes in the lumbar intervertebral foramen due to flexion, extension, lateral bending, and axial rotation. And this particular paper showed that the intervertebral foramen increases in size when you tilt toward that side laterally. And I couldn't get my head around that. So I called in one of my subject matter experts on this, somebody who has made a living out of, assume he's making a living out of it. I hope so, Jerome. Out of making models based on best available science on what we've actually got going on at these particular levels. So let me bring Jerome on here. Jerome, you got your ears on, brother? And if you do, Jerome, when you get on there, let me see if I can give you the ability to share screen. I think if I do that, I'm going to pin Jerome right here right quick. Everybody can see Jerome's output there. Okay. And Jerome, show us and talk us through what you and I were discussing yesterday about the IVF and how the size of the IVF changes when we laterally bend.
You can hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, we've got head nods. Cool.
Okay, good. So your question was, when you contacted me, was when you laterally bend this way, let's go this way, for example, right? What happens to the IVF?
Yep.
Right. And in that paper that you mentioned, they talked about, and I think it's has to do with just the language that they've used. But they said that let's get this here slowly show that the IVFs actually opened on the concave side, correct?
Correct.
And you and I both don't agree.
Yeah.
Because when you laterally flex it to the left, the right IVFs will open. So I think it's just a matter of how they've chosen the words convex and concave, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was my opinion as well. And it also seemed that there was some disparity in the way they referred to the concave and convex and the lateral bending away and such within the body of the paper. And it's also important to note that the principal investigators were, I believe they were Chinese, weren't they?
It looks like it.
Yeah, I think so. So it's entirely possible that something was lost in translation. So
Right.
there, from IVF, if we're just looking at, say, Shacklock's model of openers and intervertebral, an IVF biggering to give the nerve root more room, and Shacklock's basing that on the research of a researcher by the name of Kobayashi, Japanese group. They did that in dogs, Fife. They did those studies on dogs. They did that on dogs, and they also did it in humans as well. But they showed that certain positions in a person that had symptomatic sciatica, certain positions would cause a blanching of the nerve root, and then other positions, once they decompress the nerve, those positions no longer caused a blanching of the nerve root. So that brought us up, that Jerome and I trying to get our heads around this and being kind of, I guess we're bullish on Shacklock and Kobayashi's ideas here about the benefits of opening procedures. That prompted me to get in touch with some of my colleagues that are in the MDT world, and the reports that I've gotten back thus far suggest that the council and MDT to initiate the lateral investigation by putting the affected leg against the wall, which, mind you, does not mean that's the only side you try. What should you do according to good MDT training? Test both sides empirically, right? And you choose the one that does best. And in my world, the idea of aggravating the patient with a radicular complaint less by choosing to do the procedure first, that's most likely to cause a beneficial symptom modification, is what I'm trying to do. So in my mindset, I'm using a sort of an opening model to try to affect that by putting the affected side against the wall and biggering the IVF. When I chatted up my MDT colleagues, the report I got back was their theory was that with the affected leg away from the wall, as you drop in, you cause nuclear migration away from the affected nerve root. And indeed, in this paper that I just cited, the one about the morphologic changes, they noticed that on lateral bending in a cadaver, which we have to put in, we have to address with a little bit of skepticism because the disc mechanics are going to be entirely different there. But in the cadaver, they did show that there was a nuclear migration away from the concave side. So if it was bent this way, the nucleus would move in that direction. Okay.
Creating a lower pressure, right? So it's about, if you think about gapping this side, right? Just like a low pressure atmospheric, it brings in water and moisture, right?
Right.
And when you see, kilopascals drop, you've got moisture on the way. So if you open this side here, the nucleus, if there is nucleus, will tend to migrate towards a lower intradiscal side. If we could put a pressure gauge, not just in the middle, But if we had two pressure gauges, one on this side and one on this side, pressure would be increased on that side and it'll be decreased on this side. And right. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think, again, I'm not here to create controversy. I'm here to try to integrate systems. There are a lot of very intelligent people that have, dedicated their lives and their research towards figuring this stuff out. And I think that it's worth us, all of us, to read broadly across the literature and try to integrate these ideas instead of trying to build crystalline or crystallized silos and then operate only within that silo.
I agree.
So and some of that will be topics of discussion with me tomorrow as well, when I go on with Glenn Harris's program and talk about the various systems that have been employed out there to try to conceptualize low back pain and musculoskeletal issues in general. And there's a lot of named systems out there, people. And almost all of them seem to come from Australia or New Zealand. I don't know, those guys, rugby and low back pain research seem to be the national sports over there. So, but, yeah, again, you guys, if you want to join us with Glenn Harris's program over there at MSK Plus, we'll be going all day long tomorrow. And Glenn has dropped on the Zoom here in the chat. You guys can find a link to that. You guys that are over on Facebook here, you can find a link to that as well over at MSK Plus. You get a bit of a benefit there by using Blazers, capital B on the B as in Trailblazers, in your sign up there. And what's the benefit there, Glenn, on that?
So right now that's $339 Canadian dollars. Saves you, it's $395 regular.
Cool. So you can save yourself a little money on that. That's about all I got for today, people. You guys have any questions, comments?
I have a question, Philip.
Mark, you're still in Baja.
I'm still in Baja. Yeah.
You lucky man.
Life is tough. Anyway, the question is now, it's only in the last month or so I've started doing TNM. And based on all the hands-on stuff I've done over the years, there's usually, when you're going side to side on something, there's a direction that feels more restricted. And some systems would say, go in the direction of resistance. Do you have any thoughts on, do you want to do TNM just back and forth, or do you want to go in the direction of the barrier, or what?
I think my bias, Mark, would be to do both. I'm just going to be thorough and do both and look for, just like the empirical process within MDT, of try it all and empirically choose the one that you get the most symptom modification with. I think the patient's results there, as opposed to the so-called operators' subjective feelings about what is more important, probably are more important. After all, they are there to try to get symptom relief, and I would choose the direction that gives them the most symptoms relief. I like the bougainvillea back there in the background. That's wow. They've got an an orange, a pink, and a red one there. That's delightful. Yeah. All right. Anybody else got any questions? Chris, looks like you're taking off. Thank you so much for joining, my friend. Help us spread help
Yeah,
us spread
thank you.
the word.
Yes,
Help us spread
absolutely.
the word with your colleagues over there in the rehab side of things. And please do come join us on the online bit and come and play with us here too.
We'll do. I have a really quick question for you,
Shoot.
if you don't mind. Regarding
Not at
your powerlifting athlete, with enough practice and repetition, has it been your experience that modification of that function pattern can or does become an engram or a subcortical movement pattern?
Let me make sure I understand you correctly. That the position, the coached position for competition on a bench
Yes.
press,
Yes.
that becomes their movement engram after coaching.
Correct.
I would say that it does. I would say that it takes per RJ's question earlier, that it takes some conscious training on the part of the athlete to change that. I remember in Stu's book, Ultimate Back Fitness, I remember he had some photos in there of Christian Thibodeau, and Stu was recommending using standing cable chest press and cable crossovers as a way to integrate spine stabilization via the core, and a little more of a I guess call it innate position of the core for function, as opposed to the position and that is coached in competition. Which, by the way, I mean, some of you will know, but some of you might not know. The whole reason why that exaggerated bridge is coached in powerlifting is because it allows the athlete on that particular lift to move more weight. Wait a minute. If we're on one hand saying that a stacked thoracopelvic canister enables better intra-abdominal pressure, which should infer downstream functionally that they're able to move more weight, why does that not hold up in that supine position? The answer to that question seems to be because of bar transit. Physically, the distance that the bar moves is shorter when you arch up in that particular way. And a similar sort of thing occurs on the deadlift as well when you move to a sumo deadlift pattern. The bar transit is less distant than it is with a conventional deadlift. So that is in part with the deadlift why you see that change as well. You'll also see, and we coach commonly in our disc injured power lifters, we move them over to that sumo deadlift style pattern because the initial pull from the floor puts them in a more optimal position vis-a-vis a flexion moment on the spine at the initial pull from the floor. But yeah, you get a nice stretchy bar and enough weight on the bar and an athlete in a sumo deadlift pattern, and you can have a whole lot of distance covered before the weight even gets off of the floor. But you got to be big enough to make that bar bend. All right, good question, Chris. Thank you for that. Anyone else? All right, as you guys know, we record these and I put the recordings on the blog at neurocentricapproach.com. Feel free to go back and view any of those if you like, or to share with your friends and colleagues. I'm thinking about a way to expand membership here, of throwing some bones out to people, to those of you that are members. Something like something compelling, like maybe a free seat at the courses if you refer 2 people to sign up on the online platform, something like that. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that worthwhile or not? I'd save you about $600 or so off of the seat at the in-person course, just for telling your colleagues about what we're doing, and hopefully we demonstrate enough value that they decide to actually join and become members of the online platform. Of course, you got to share it with people that are outside of your collection, where your patients are. You got to share it with all your colleagues that you went to school with that are in other cities, right? Because otherwise you're referring to your competitors in your catchment area. If that's the way you're rationalizing things, whatever. Anyway, you guys feel free to give me some feedback on that. You can send me an email at drphillipsnell@gmail.com. I appreciate your time, your attention, your curiosity, and indeed, with your curiosity, continue it. Keep a compassionate air as you do, and use what you learn, and let's go help some people. All right. You guys be well.
Thanks,
Cheers. Right on.